Hello, I'm Paul Gabriel, and my guest today is James Keith, the Ambassador of the United States of America to Malaysia. Welcome to Menara Star, Ambassador.
Thank you, Paul.
Congratulations on your posting to Malaysia.
Oh, I'm very honored to be here. Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Let me first start by asking you, what are your immediate priorities here as the Ambassador?
Well, one of the things that I need to emphasize is the unrealized potential in our relationship. I think there's a lot we can do together. We're, of course, succeeding very well on security and economic issues. The trade relationship is very important. We want to see more Malaysian students come to the United States, very interested in issuing more visas to Malaysians of all kinds, from all backgrounds, students, business people, that sort of thing. In general, though, the main theme I would get across is that I feel that the American people and the Malaysian people have a lot more that they can do together.
Mm-hmm. Well, Malaysia and the United States share very close economic ties, and we have an ongoing FTA negotiations with the United States. What is the level of talks now, and can Malaysians and Americans agree to what is put on the table?
I believe so. We have just had a good round of negotiation just before Malaysia's election, and of course we face the challenge of fitting these negotiations now into the political calendar that exists on both sides. The elections just concluded here in Malaysia, as well as our upcoming presidential election in the United States. But we've managed over the course of 2 years or so to identify the issues, I think, and have come to the conclusion that in general we agree on the substance. It's really a question more of timing than substance now. And I think we're very interested in managing another round of negotiations in the relatively near future, certainly before the end of the term of this next administration. And we remain quite optimistic that we can reach conclusion, mainly because the substance of the negotiation touches on issues that are important to Malaysia and the United States together, that we have common ground, and it's really mainly about how to phase in the different aspects of the relationship in this the trade relationship in this negotiation. I'm very optimistic.
Mm-hmm. Malaysia has appointed a new international trade minister. Will this have any impact on the ongoing talks? I understand he's even going to the United States soon.
Well, I certainly wouldn't put words in the mouth of the minister. I'd have to ask you to ask him in terms of the short-term effects. But I guess looking at it from the American perspective, I would think that the enduring interests of the two countries are tied up in this relationship and tied up in this negotiation, I should say. And because of that, I think that whether it's a different ambassador or a different minister, we all have to represent the interests of our people. And because I think this relationship will serve the long-term interest of the Malaysian people, my sense is that we'll be able to sustain the pace of negotiation and continue to invest heavily in this trade relationship.
Ambassador, investment-wise, what is the feedback you get from U.S. multinationals in Malaysia? Are there any concerns being voiced by them?
Well, it's a good place for us to do business, and it's been a good investment destination for us in many areas. An example is the electronics industry, where we have a large number of American firms in Malaysia, across the peninsula, doing good business on the basis of the educated workforce here and the high level and quality of the infrastructure, here. But what I would say is, in some cases, we have American firms who are doing good business here on the basis of individual negotiated deals. And what we're hoping to do is change the structure a bit such that when it comes time to attract foreign interest, it's not just on the basis of an individually negotiated deal, but on a very transparent, very wide open basis. An outside firm can come in and determine what the factors are, what the parameters are, and whether it would be a good investment decision on the part of an outsider. So we're hoping to make more standard those conditions which exist for any number of very successful American companies that have been here for decades and decades and have contributed to the more than $30 billion in investment, that cumulative investment that has come from Americans and helped the Malaysian economy to succeed.
The U.S. economy is said to be heading into a recession, and what can be done to lessen the detrimental effects here? Because, you know, when they say America coughs, we catch a cold.
Yes. Well, I think the key is to recognize precisely that mutual sense of engagement, of vulnerability, but also of opportunity to succeed. Of course, it's been the case that Malaysia has done quite well because of the hard work of the Malaysian people, the smart decisions that one government after another has made here in Malaysia, but also it's been the case that the American market has been open to Malaysian traders, and that's been an extremely beneficial aspect of Malaysia's growth in recent decades. Clearly, that comes with challenges in today's economy. Globalization means that our economies are integrated, and we have to deal with that as a reality. So to some extent, as governments, as leaders, we have to resist the temptation to try to shut ourselves off from some of the vulnerabilities and difficulties that come from facing the reality that we're integrated, and recognize that those difficulties or challenges come with the opportunities. And therefore, dialogue is important, and constant attention to the structure of our trade, which is what the FTA is all about. The negotiation for a trade agreement will help adjust the structure of our trade in such a way that we can maximize our interests, maximize our mutual opportunities. And so I would say the best thing we can do for the long term in order to deal with the fact that perhaps when America sneezes, others catch colds, is both on a local and regional level, that is through our negotiations with Malaysia and with ASEAN, and to a certain extent ongoing in APEC, the overall Asia-Pacific Economic Forum, and then also importantly in the World Trade Organization's Doha round of global trade talks. We need to come together and ensure that the dialogue between developed and developing countries, between different continents, between different sectors within economies on different continents is conducted in an accelerated fashion aimed at producing results for the developed and the developing world alike.
On the US government's popularity in Malaysia, it took a plunge after you attacked Iraq in 2003, and the war is still not over. You said during your Senate confirmation hearing that too few Malaysians held positive view of the United States. What is your public diplomacy initiatives to help overcome this?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's important to recognize what happened on September 11th. Part of what I explained during my confirmation hearings and have explained subsequently is the cataclysmic nature of September 11th, what an important development that was in our history. And it's hard to recognize that without having been there and lived through it. But we try to explain to our international partners how that event affected our view of America's security, and it genuinely continues to affect our views today. That said, we've taken a lot of steps, and we've been very dynamic in trying to reach out to international partners and to audiences overseas to help explain that the Statue of Liberty stands for exactly what it stood for before, that Americans are the same Americans you knew when you traveled and studied there in the 1980s, or when perhaps you took a trip to Disney World or to New York to see a Broadway show, that all those things that attracted you in the first place about America continue to be those things that are prevailing in the United States today. So the more we can have interaction, the more exchanges, the more dialogue, the better, because I think then that helps create a baseline. And certainly we're trying to move in that direction. There are about 600,000 foreign students in the United States today, and it's the case that about 20% increase has occurred over the last year in our issuance of student visas to Malaysians. And it's the case that there are now more students studying in the United States, foreign students studying in the United States today than there were before September 11th. So gradually this is coming back, and I think over time we'll move back to what we like to believe is a more normal appreciation of what's happening in the United States and what America stands for. But it's going to take some time. I would hope that people can be patient with us as we work our way through some of our security concerns, and we'll certainly do our best to be patient with our friends and partners abroad as they express constructive criticism to us and give us some good advice on how we can move forward.
Ambassador, what is your take on the recent general election results in Malaysia? 5 opposition triumphs in the states, and the federal government lost its 2/3 parliamentary majority. How do you see it? Democracy well and alive in Malaysia?
Well, I think it's certainly the case that it's got to be seen as a healthy development when there are more voices, more deliberation, more examination of one's premises, that sort of thing. I think the debate in Malaysia that's going now will lead to a stronger and more resilient Malaysia over time. I think certainly this has to raise some questions in people's minds in the short term as to how things will turn out, and there's a degree of uncertainty perhaps that can be uncomfortable for people to live with. I can understand that. It certainly happens in the United States on a regular basis as we go through our own elections. But I do believe that what's happened in Malaysia in recent months will, over time, as history records it, be demonstrated as an important development in the direction of a more stable, successful, and prosperous Malaysia, which would be good for the United States too.
Mm-hmm. Malaysia decided 2008, the United States decides 2008. Mm-hmm. I won't ask you who's going to win, whether it's going to be Senator Obama, Senator Clinton, or Senator McCain, but I'll ask you this. What do you think ought to be the priorities of the next US administration?
Well, I think you're right not to ask me to predict, because there's no way my crystal ball can be any better than any in Malaysia who, had they been asked to predict the outcome of the Malaysian election. So I do think it's clear this is the most open election we've had in a long time in the United States, because the president is finishing his second and final term. The vice president isn't running, so there isn't an incumbent. And on the opposing side, there isn't an heir apparent or an obvious candidate who would clearly take the lead. So it's a very wide open and exciting election in the United States, which will represent something of a departure, I suspect, from the past, only in the sense that all the candidates have enunciated a particular point of view in terms of how to re-engage America with the world and how to tell the world the American story in their own terms. And whoever's elected will have a very personal way of conveying the American narrative. So I think what you can look for is an America that's committed to internationalism, that's committed to the institutions of the international mainstream, whether it's the World Health Organization, the United Nations, or the World Trade Organization, and an America that's committed to engaging the rest of the world in our story and making it clear that we feel we're all in this together, whether it's on the health side, the economic side, the political side, that as a result of globalization and the increasing integration of economies around the world, we genuinely feel that this isn't a world in which we have to work together, and in which we have to, through a process of mutual respect and constructive ideas that we come to together, move forward together in the fashion that I think people have come to recognize over the years has been the American approach, whether you go back to the Peace Corps days in Malaysia when people have fond memories, or the days when Malaysia was the #1 source of foreign students in the United States. I think people will find that in the future, those kinds of personal connections will be more and more available to them, which I think will be good for the people of both countries.
Mm-hmm. How's the global war on terror going as far as the Malaysian position is concerned?
Well, we have a terrific relationship with the Malaysian government. This is one of the areas where, over time, we've come to identify a tremendous amount of common ground. We clearly have the same perspective when it comes to dealing with violent extremists and dealing with threats to innocent people. This isn't about religions or societies. This is about the government's primary obligation to protect the security of its citizens. And I think we've had, as we have elsewhere in ASEAN, tremendous cooperation from the Malaysian side toward the American side, and I can't put words in the mouth of the Malaysian government, but I believe they would draw the same conclusion about our commitment to the Malaysian perspective. I know that there have been some areas where we don't always see eye to eye, and generally those have been outside this region and in the larger context of the Middle East peace process, where there's a very complicated situation and lots of room for competing ideas. But when it comes to dealing with violent extremism in this part of the world, we've had a tremendous record of success and every reason to believe that that will continue.
One last question, and I'm sure many of our viewers want to hear the response. If a Malaysian wants to visit the United States, is it still as simple as it was before 9/11?
It is much easier than it was in the immediate aftermath of 9/11. You can get a visa in about 3 or 4 days at the American Embassy. The one thing that's a little bit more complicated is that you actually have to show up at the embassy. but we have a computer process for, that is internet-based process for making appointments. We're working to make sure that you don't have to come back to the embassy if you don't want to. You can have your passport with a visa and it mailed to you afterwards. So as I say, from the point of making the appointment right through to getting your visa back and your passport, it shouldn't take more than 3 or 4 days. And we issue visas to more than 9 out of every 10 people who apply. And as I say, the numbers are going up year by year, and we're at the point now where more students are in the United States than there were in 2001. We're working hard in terms of customer service. We see all the applicants at the embassy as our customers, and we want to provide the best possible customer service we can.
Thank you very much for your time, Mr. Ambassador, and thank you very much for your efforts. We would like to thank the Ambassador, James Keith, for his time and for his visit to Menara Star. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paul.
Thank you.